looking at two of these pieces that I purchased, and I'd like to get some feedback from some of you, if you'd like, on where is something good and where is something not so good in these two trees. Now, these are very, very, very beginning trees. I just severely thinned them a couple weeks ago before I realized I was going to use them tonight. So they look a little skeletal, but that's as it should be. They've got a lot longer to go. So imagine, if you will, that my goal is to make these look like a mature elm tree, and it could be a Chinese elm, it could be an American elm, with a characteristic vase shape rather than kind of a mushroom shape, a fan shape, kind of characteristic vase shape. And because it's going to be a group planting, I don't want them to be a lot taller than they are. So the two trees, I think you can see them here just using the camera on my computer. The tree that I'm handling right now is very raw, very, very much at the very beginning of things. And you can see that the trunk is relatively straight. That's what I was looking for. And there are some horizontal branches, which is also characteristic of elm trees in the lower part of the canopy, because when the trees were young, the branching was excurrent, meaning that the branches emerged individually from the trunk, from a central leader. And it's only after the tree began to mature that it began to have that typical vase shape with the ascending branches. So, got a little bit of that here. The other tree has a lot more of the horizontal branches. And when we get up near the top, we see that it's divided, and that we've lost the central leader, which is, of course, characteristic of broom style. So the question is, if you were selecting trees for my purpose, is there something that you would see that's a good idea and something that you would see that's not such a good idea about the two trees? And this might, you haven't looked at them for a long time, and so it might be a little bit puzzling, because this really over here, what I'm pointing at right here, it appears to be much more of a pine tree shape until you get right to the top. But I think it's still a good candidate because these are thin branches and these can all be lifted up. But what do we have at the top? And where is my concern about this tree? And it happens that my concern about the tree and about those branches at the top has to do with, up here, proportion. That those branches near the top of the tree, if I were going to keep them, are very thick. That we wouldn't see branches of that thickness. Now, if I were going to turn this into a 30-inch tall bonsai, maybe and with a much thicker trunk, that would be fine. But right now, for a relatively slender tree of about 15 inches for a group planting, those branches are very thick and they're not in proportion to the rest of the tree. So that's one of the things that I would consider problematic. So the question is, what would I do about that? And actually, and I am going to use this tree, but actually, I am not going to use what's up here. These really are too big. And I'll be very much able to use the branches that are lower on the trunk to start that top with the vase-shaped top that I'm looking for. Some of the lower branches will be eliminated later. So there's what we have at the moment. If you're wondering what this is, I'm looking to make this a possible second trunk, like a double trunk tree. So does anybody have any questions on this one at this point? Nobody raise their hand? Okay. So I'm going to put these away. If anything comes up later, let me know. But you can see that the branches on this tree were much more in scale. Now, there's going to be cutting, there's going to be wiring, and so on. But eventually, we have to get down. And in fact, I could cut this lower. I could come in here and say, look, these branches are nice and thin. I can work this down lower, and it'll be just great. One of the things that makes a tree look like a bonsai instead of a tree is that the branches are out of proportion with the trunk. They're too long, they're too thick, and I've got a sort of a hideous example of that I'm going to show you tonight. One of the things that I think for a kind of a show and tell, as I'm going to do tonight, that makes me it makes me better able to do this than maybe some other artists who you've had, and that's because these people have a lot of really great trees. And when I was working for 25 years at what's now the Pacific Bonsai Museum, the Pacific Rim Bonsai Collection, when I was working there, my professional work was on those trees, somebody else's trees. My own personal trees sort of got pushed into a back corner and pretty much ignored, I'm sorry to say, for a long time. And I'm in a position, since I retired from there, of seeing what I can kind of rebuild, bring back, and so forth. So this idea of making changes is very personal. So anyway, I'm going to put these guys aside. And so this was an idea of choosing between two different trees. When I do a program, a lecture demonstration, I like to have trees that give me choices. So if you have a piece of material that gives you one option, I find that less interesting because it's predictable. So where are you going to go? Well, you're going to go right where the tree tells you. But if we find a tree that has some good characteristics, but it provides more than one option, that's a bonus. And so I'm bringing forward this little Japanese black pine, and it might be that I can get some closer views with my phone, and I think the long view you can see from the computer. And this one has some faults, and it has some good aspects from two different sides. So basically, I'm going to use my phone now and see if I can get us kind of zeroed in on this tree. Let me know if you can see this okay. The first thing I want to look at is the roots. The roots from this side spread out from the trunk, but they're a little bit kind of reared up. They're a little bit lumpy looking, but not bad. I mean, the worst of the roots can be eliminated by simply removing them, and you have a pretty respectable root base. The bark has a nice texture, starting to look mature, and the tree has a fairly decent movement. One of the things that's important to me is the idea of proportion, again, in the movement of the trunk, so that the distance to the first movement up here from right, going back to just a little left of vertical, is about the span of my hand. The next unit is probably about 2.5 inches. The unit after that is a little long, but it doesn't look terribly long because it's foreshortened by its direction. And then a couple more elements of movement. One of the things I find is that as we approach the top of the tree, I'm not getting a whole lot of taper. And I'd like to see the taper to give a better impression of maturity. I have another option rather than the part that goes to the left, and that's the part that goes to the right. And that does give me a little bit more taper, and it gives me a consistent left to right flow from the bottom of the tree up to the top. So sort of two options from this side of the tree, but that's not all. I can turn it around. And I find from here, as I look at the roots, the root that appeared to be so kind of humped up before looks a lot tamer from this side, and a little bit more, a little bit nicer. And then over here on this side, this is good. We have a number of small roots that emerge from the trunk instead of a couple of big ones. So I like that very much. The first movement is very good. We've got good taper coming up into this area here, more movement. And finally, we come up into this piece. And my impression is that from this side of the tree, I have a lot of good elements. I have good roots, the good texture of the bark, branches that are emerging on the outside of the curves, counterbalancing branches. The scar for removal of the large part would be in back. And then I finally have quite a few small branches that have started here that will fill out and build a nice crown for us. So I think that either of these fronts would be a good front. As you can tell, I think one of them would be better than the other. And this is, again, what I consider a very good piece of material as demo material. And it's good for you, for anyone, when we go shopping for trees, if we can find a piece like this that gives us a little bit of exercise in terms of how are we going to treat it. Okay, I'm going to move to another tree, and I'm going to put my phone down for a moment. I'm going to put my turntable up. So instead of showing you my my successes, which I usually do on Facebook, look everybody, my nice tree. In this case tonight, I'm going to show you some sort of disasters. And the question is, can we do something with a disaster to make it less disastrous? And sometimes what we can do with is limited. Sometimes we can do something that turns out quite successfully. I'm going to show you a couple of really odd pieces, and you can decide if it's successful or not. These are just getting started. Okay, so the background is about 3 years ago, we had in March, we had a deep and sudden freeze. The temperature dropped about 40 degrees in less than 12 hours, and right down to around 20 degrees from around 65, 21 or so, and everything was off the ground and on my benches, and a couple of the azaleas, as well as some other things, really took it hard, and so this is a kinsai, and I'd cut the blossoms off already, but that stimulated a couple more buds to form. And this is an old plant, and when kinsai get old, the flowers kind of revert from having the strap-like shaped petals into the wide petals. And so this is the idea that it's an old tree. Now, this tree used to be a quite handsome slanting style tree. And it died back to the point that it had 2 branches. And I thought, well, what can I do with this? And I can throw it in the garbage, but that, you know, I hate just throwing a living thing in the garbage. And so I looked at it and I looked at it, and a result of a few of my trips to China is that I had a chance to look at one style of penjing that involves using the trunk or the stump of an old tree as a landform, so that the branches that emerge from that slanting or horizontal trunk are trees in their own right. They're individual trees, and the trunk becomes like a slope, a hillside, or it becomes sometimes an archway or whatever. And I really became quite enamored of that style of penjing. And so this is a sort of desperate attempt. I took the tree and I laid it over on its side. And this is it's just starting. I just did this about a month ago. I looked at this thing, and I again, as I said, I was faced with tossing it or doing something with it. And so this is what I ended up doing. So one side of the root ball is over here on this hump. The low branch is going to, I hope, at some point, you know, resolve itself as one tree. And the second branch near the top, I hope will resolve itself as another tree. And if this will help, I'll put the phone on it. And let me know if this is doing good or if it doesn't matter.
Looks good.
So you can see as I turn it around. And I haven't decided on the angle yet. I haven't decided, well, what will be the relationship of these trees to each other? And the other thing is that I'm sure there are going to be some people making comments to themselves, if not to others or to me, is that there's a lot of deadwood on here, and azaleas don't have deadwood. Well, azaleas that have had a hard time have deadwood. It's as simple as that. And one of the things I noticed going through Dan Robinson's place near Seattle, across the water from Seattle, is that he has a lot of deadwood on azaleas that have been bonsai for many years. And it has sustained itself. So anyway, this is one sort of desperate move to say, how can I just keep this plant out of the trash and let it be of some use as bonsai. Eventually, of course, this side, the root ball will be taken down, so it'll be flat, and this can be moved back in the pot, and it will look a lot more like a tree that falls in the forest, not an earth log exactly, but we've all seen trees that have blown down. I think we've all seen trees that have blown down and then established a group of secondary trees from the branches. So anyway, this is one of the 2 azaleas that were almost totally destroyed 3 years ago. I'm going to put the phone down again and move trees. This is a Southern Indica Azalea. And I collected this when I lived in New Orleans. A friend of mine in the orchestra was an avid hunter and fisherman and used to roam around the South looking for places to hunt and fish. But also, by the way, he happened to have acquired an interest in bonsai. So he was also searching for places to get bonsai or stock. And as it turns out, one day he came upon an abandoned nursery. It was, the property was owned by a retired physician who had no interest in the 10,000 azaleas that were on the property. And so this friend of mine asked if he could dig some, and the doctor said, yes, go ahead. You know, it's fine. I've got fields of these things. Just go ahead. So he and I went out and collected quite a number of azaleas from this field, and this is one of them. And you might, if I will put the phone on it, but you might see that there's a kind of a reverse taper a little bit, and that's because half of the trunk rotted. And the reason half of the trunk rotted was that was the dead half of the trunk where I had taken off some large, low branches. And in my experience, azaleas, more than any other kind of plant, seem to have a very direct connection between root A and branch A, branch B and root B. And especially low branches or large branches, when you remove a branch like that, very often the roots that served it become unemployed and they die. And then the connecting tissue between the root, the now dead root, and the missing branch, that vascular tissue all dies. And then you've got a dead zone in your azalea. And so that's what I had here, and it remained as dead wood for many years. And the reason why it had that dead wood was because when we collected these azaleas, they were shrubs. They were, you know, grown as landscape material, and they were not pruned so they'd have a single trunk. And there were shrubs, and so part of making them not shrubs was to take off the stems that were superfluous. And of course, removing those is what ended up causing me to have several azaleas with dead areas. Not all of them had rotted bases, but this one did. But what I want to show you here is, I don't know if you would count how many branches this has. There's, you know, this one here, back branch here, something in front, back here, the top of the tree. And so it's got a complement of very thin branches, just getting started. Actually, the tree has 3 branches. And you know, there's cheating and then there's cheating. and so this branch back here becomes the back branch and a side branch. And it has another little section that's been tied against the trunk that forms another side branch and a front branch. This is a live branch over here from the tree. And then this is the third and final branch, but that is also over here, that is also creating, I'm going to put the phone on this so you can see it a little better. Tell me how well you can see what I've done here. As you can see, I've used zip ties in many cases. Zip ties are great if you want to pull something down or pull something together. They're really quick, they're really easy, The black ones don't deteriorate. They last for a long, long time, for years, if you choose to keep them on for years. And so this top of this tree is actually a loop of a branch that comes from the side over here. I don't know how much you can see exactly. The image that I see on my phone is tiny.
Well, look on your laptop. But Dave, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Dodie.
Yeah, it's really hard to hold the camera, the phone correctly.
No, you're doing fine.
Turn around.
So are you hoping that they're going to grow into the trunk eventually? Or just
okay, so my objective here is to to turn it into, it would almost be like a tanuki. I'm looking for the English name. Tanuki in Japanese means badger, and they use that term instead of the bird that rises from the ashes.
Oh, phoenix.
Phoenix. Right. It's not really a phoenix graph, but it's very similar, except instead of using another tree, I'm using its own branches. I'm using the branches. It's all one tree. It's not a piece of dead wood with a young tree attached to it. It's using its own branches to create the illusion of having a full crown and more branches in it. So this is an experiment, and I'm just trying to see with some of these techniques where they take me. And I would say that this particular tree has the potential to be pretty good looking, and I will probably change the front somewhat to be from here. I should get it in where I can pick up some of the flare of the base over here, and that's where I'd like this thing to go. But again, it's a long process. This grew. It had very, very long shoots that I removed recently, and again. I've got fertilizer on it. I'm trying to pump it up a little bit, and I'm just going to see what comes of it. But I find it exciting, challenging to take something that has very little potential and to see if I can do something with it. So maybe check in about 3 years and see where this is. That would be maybe a lot of fun. Okay, so 2 things that we've looked at so far. One thing is taking raw nursery stock and saying, well, how are we going to use this? Where do we want to go? And I've been focusing on a lot on proportion. There are also issues of balance and harmony that we're going to look at. And I'm going to now go to a tree that, unlike the freeze damage, this is self-inflicted damage. In other words, I told you that for 25 years, I pretty much ignored my trees. I kept them watered and didn't do a lot with them. So I'm going to show you another Chinese elm, and I'm going to show you what can happen to a tree, or certainly a Chinese elm, when it's allowed to be untended. Okay, so I was trimming this the other day and then I stopped. So this is, you can see I stopped at the 2 lower branches. But this is this was a really very nice tree. It had really a very full crown. And a couple of years ago, I was looking at it and I said, you know, this really, it looks great when it's got leaves on it, but it really doesn't make it when it's leafless, because I've been trimming this, just sort of shearing it to an outline. And that meant that I had long segments of branch that didn't divide. So everything kind of divided out toward the end of the branch is sort of an afterthought. It was kind of a shame because this tree I grew from seed that I pulled off a Chinese elm in New Orleans in 1978. And so it's been around a long time. But it's been around a long time with this number of branches. And what you're seeing here is branches that have grown out of all out of proportion. They're much too thick. And they're even getting kind of lumpy thick looking. So really kind of unfortunate. And even when I get the ramification back, which I'm starting to get, that's ramification that's happening close to the trunk, there's still not going to be beautiful branches. And that train has left the station, I'm afraid, on here. So, and here's why. Chinese elms do two things, and this is where you see this the most is with bald cypress. Bald cypress tend to make whorls or clumps of foliage at the ends of a branch, or where they've been cut, or where they start growing in the new season. And if you don't go in there when the foliage is young and pick it off and thin it down to two little shoots. If you don't get it down to 2 shoots kind of early on, you get a knob or a lump at the end of every twig on your bald cypress. And to a lesser degree, that's true of trees in related genera. Like for instance, a related genus is to Taxodium, is Taxus, yews, that can happen with yews. And the other one is redwoods. Redwoods will start doing the same thing, so that you finally get this lump at the end of a branch, and then you have to cut back behind the lump to get rid of it. And you're starting your branching over, and it comes from not getting at the shoots that develop soon enough. And so this does not produce worlds of branches, but it produces a lot of branches close together, a lot of shoots that are very close together, and they produce the same effect that left untended, as this is pretty much untended right here from this spring, that they get massive swellings. I have a Japanese maple, pure old Acer palmatum, not a variety or a cultivated variety or anything, just Acer palmatum. But I have to be very careful pinching shoots on that, because the branches want to get massive. They swell up very quickly, and with very little encouragement. And so this idea of pinching shoots when they're young. And one of the issues with Chinese elms is that with maples, you trim the shoots immediately, very early, pinch out the center bud to keep the internodes from getting too long, okay? Well, on maples, it takes a long time to develop a ramified branch, because your increments of growth, if you're pinching well, are pretty slow and you don't get a lot of episodes of growth each year. Botanists say that it has a determinate growth habit. Determinate growth habit means it's got one or just a few episodes of growth every year. And Chinese elm, it would be called an indeterminate growth habit. It just keeps growing. It basically doesn't stop. Unless, I guess, where you guys are, it might get so hot in the summer that it sort of stops because the stomata are closing. But basically, with the Chinese elm, it's not a problem of having long internodes because the leaves are naturally spaced close together. So if you want to develop a branch, what you usually do with the Chinese elm is let that shoot grow until it's the thickness you want, and then cut it back to the length you want, okay? Which is kind of the opposite way of maples, where you keep cutting back always to the length that you want for that internode length. I hope that's making sense to you. I'm rattling on and not sure. It's a lot easier in a room with people.
So you see faces. Dave, this is Dodie. I have a question.
Yes.
Maybe this is my ignorance. There are no leaves on it. Is that just because you cut it back?
It's because I stripped them all off.
Okay.
Yeah, I defoliated it. Yeah.
Okay.
I defoliate all my Chinese elms usually once a year. And one of the things that, for instance, if you have a Chinese elm and you're going to put it in a show, of course this goes for a lot of other trees too. But what you can do, because they're so thick, the first thing you do is you clean out every fork. In other words, every place where there's a branch division at all, you take off not only any leaves that are growing on the inside of the fork, you take out any leaves that are on the outside of the fork. So the objective is, until you get to the current year shoots, every fork along every branch is cleaned out so that it's visible. So that way you ensure that you see the structure of the tree. And then the other issue is that you simply cut back the new shoots to 2 to 3 leaves, or actually 1 to 3 leaves, or just so that you have a bud underlying that leaf that's pointed in the right direction for the next episode of growth. But if you do that, you make a tree that is show ready, just like right away. if you've got good structure underneath, you clean it up like that and it's beautiful. The other thing with elms is that they are a favorite material of penjing artists in China. They're used for many different styles of penjing. And one of the styles that we're all familiar with, or that we've heard of at least, is Lingnan. And the Ling Mountains it's a mountain range that runs east to west, kind of in the northern part of Guangdong province and Fujian province and the southern provinces of China. So there's this mountain range that runs east to west, and Lingnan means south of the Ling Mountains, and then Lingbei is north of the Ling Mountains. But anyway, south of the Ling Mountains is subtropical. And the old traditional style of dealing with Chinese elms and other material is that I call it, instead of making a structured branch where you have layered foliage and all of the branches flow outward from the trunk, and nothing goes down and nothing goes straight up, but everything sort of fans out and so on. I just, for lack of any other term, I call it a structured branch. Lingnan has primary branches that extend from the trunk, but when they start dividing, they divide in every direction so that they create a sort of cloud. It doesn't look structural. It's like a textural element of the tree more than a structural element of the tree. And it's a very, okay, here, plug time, my book. I have a lot of, this is available from the American Bonsai Society bookstore. And I have a lot of information on branch structure in here, including Lingnan style Chinese. So anyway, end of plug. End of plug. But on this particular tree, I have really allowed the tree to get beyond what I don't want to show it. It's too gross at this point. I'm going to put the phone camera on it. I've got pretty good rootage, and that really goes around because it's been in a shallow container since 1978. It's got roots. They're not completely even. Some are bigger than others, but it's got 360-degree roots. It's got somewhat of a taper right above there, and the trunk goes up, up, up. It tapers somewhat, but I've been growing it as a formal upright, and that's very hard to sustain. But what makes me very unhappy with it is the sort of bulbous, thick nature of the branches. So I'm not going to do this tonight, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to air layer it here. All I'm going to keep off of this top of the tree is something that would be about the size, about shohin size, okay? The middle of the tree, in my opinion, isn't retrievable, but if I cut it off here, right below the first branch, my feeling is I can make a dandy room style out of that by cutting it off here and then growing a new crop of branches. And so it's a very strange kind of way maybe of going at something, but my idea how I would go at this would be to actually take out the middle of the tree and preserve just the top and the bottom. Stranger things. And I hauled all these trees in here. I'm going to have to haul them all back out too.
That's another disadvantage of not being in person. You don't get any help.
Yeah. Okay, this is another azalea. This is an import from Japan, and I bought this from David Kreutz after I'd had a few drinks, I guess. And I like the tree. It straddles this rock, very scenic rock. The top had broken off, and I had to put it back with super glue. And so where the super glue got on the bark, in the right light, you can see it shiny. Anyway, two things about this. Number one, I like the flow of the roots around the rock from here. I don't like this branch from here. And I don't like that I missed part of the rock from this side. From this side of the tree, the roots are nice. I like the rock a lot more. We see a lot more of the rock. I think that's great, because I really like that. But the tree is even more vertical. And here's where my dissatisfaction rears its head. Because I would like to have this tree have some characteristic of flow. I want it to move. And when I was studying formal display with Mr. Sudo, the Keido teacher, he used to always talk about the standing line and the flowing line. The highest part of something or the densest part, heaviest part, the dominant element. And then the flowing line was the horizontal part of the picture. And that was the subordinate part of it. So the standing line, flowing line, you wanted to not, when it's standing erect, it has a static quality. Anything that's vertical, anything that's horizontal has a sort of static quality. When something is diagonal, it suggests movement. And so that's what I have against this tree, that we have a rock that has nice movement in it. I hope you can see that. But then we've got a tree that starts out with movement, with the roots flowing around the rock. And then after that, the tree simply rises almost vertically. And I think that in terms of the tree, even though I don't like to see this big branch here, and that's a big one to take off, I could probably kill off a few roots removing that. But I think while it's inoffensive from this side, because you don't see it emerging from the trunk, you see just the foliage, I find it very offensive from this side. So I suspect that what I'm going to be doing over the next 2 years is cutting back bit by bit of this branch and allowing the tree time to form alternate routes of flow around it without killing off the roots just like that, and eventually getting rid of this. But the other thing is this vertical quality. And so,
Dave, do you mind using your phone?
okay, I'm gonna get you close up here. All right, so here's the bottom. Can you all see this now? Here are the roots flowing up. There are the
Yes.
branches going across. You see that?
Yes.
And then coming up, and now it's pretty much straight. Here's the crown of the tree is directly above this. Now, here it is from the other side with a close-up view. There's the stone. I really like this part of the stone where you can see the part that's lying on the ground. And now we see the trunk sort of swirling around the rock. But now, even more so, it goes straight up. So I find it's too tall and has too little movement. The question is, what am I going to do about it? And I think that when we look up here, even if I pull this over a lot, it doesn't seem that it's going to change the effect of making the tree vertical. And so I'm going to tell you that I have a plan of taking out the whole back side of what is now the crown. I hope you can, wait a minute, I've got to stop the turntable. So bringing this over quite far, bringing it down quite a lot, which really helps in terms of the proportion of the tree. And then this, if I left this on back here, it would turn into the top of the tree, which would be, again, directly straight above the rest of it. And so what's going to happen in this one is taking off the whole back of the crown and then using wire, moving this down and then rebuilding the back side of the crown. So it will definitely be a better tree. But here again, choices have been made for this tree for years. Choices in Japan, When it came here to me, of course, I didn't make so many choices because it was in my backyard, not being paid attention to. But now that I have the time, I've turned my attention back to it. And now there's going to be more work on this tree to get it to a state that I appreciate. And that's going to mean taking off, seeing it from this side, where even though the rock is not as good as I'd like it to be, the tree is better. And the tree's the thing. Removing this branch, bringing my crown down and to the left, and rebuilding the back of the crown so that it's not a gap. So anyway, that's an example of again, another tree that is going to have work done to it. Now we're going to take a little break. When we come back, I'm going to show you some trees that have had work done to them, that have had a lot of changes, but still can be candidates for additional change. And if any of you have questions, I'd be happy to take them. Are we all ready for a break then?
I think that timing is wonderful, Dave. I'm looking to try to, Renee to take over again.
Okay. I'm not taking a break, so so if anybody does have anything to any comments or questions or anything like that, I'm here. Okay? Thank you.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to have a comment or question.
Okay. It's okay.
May I make a comment?
Yes.
This is Kathleen. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate your vocabulary. It gives us such a better view of what you're talking about. The use of language that's typical that an artist would use to speak about things in that manner made what you were saying much richer. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
David?
Yes.
Hi. Is there any chance that you have an example of the Chinese elms that you were first talking about, and you're going to put a group of trees together? I don't know what that looks like, being kind of new. Do you have an example of that? Where you're headed, what it's supposed to kind of?
I have a lot of examples because I've done, but I will have to email them. I don't have them on this computer, but I would be happy to share those with Dodie, who could share them with you.
Okay.
I've taken 3 trips to China since 2010, and they're going to conventions there where they have gigantic shows.
Mm-hmm.
700 trees kind of shows. And this last time that I went, it was north of the Ling Mountains. So we had to go through half of our trip was through tunnels, but it was kind of more inland, a little town called Junyi. And I said little town, it's only 400,000 people. So it's a village, but they don't even have an airport. But they had a huge modern hotel, and they had a gigantic display. And the Lingnan style was evident there, even because there were people coming up from Guangdong province and bringing their trees with them. But they had this thing that I talked about when I showed you that azalea that was dead. Basically a dead stump with the 2 branches. And he said, I want the dead trunk to be like a landform. There were a lot of examples of that style there. But just a minute, let me see. Maybe we can do it this way right now, but I'd still be happy to send you. Let me go to the chapter on branch arrangement, branch development, and shape texture. And here's deadwood. So we're getting close to branch structure. Okay. So the idea of lignon style is once the branch has been brought, once the primary branch has been positioned and is shaped, once you have that, the small branches, the secondary, tertiary, quaternary, the twigs, all those branches, there are a couple rules. First of all, there's my rule, which I sort of got from them, that I use with everybody. And the three rules for developing a branch is what I call 3 changes. And when you make cuts, the 3 changes are you change the length, diameter, and direction. Every time you cut, you change the length, going from longer to shorter segment. You change the diameter, thicker to thinner, and you change the direction. So those are the 3 changes. But then the other thing that some of the Chinese artists talk about is if 2 branches touch, cut one. In other words, you don't have intermingled branches and intermingled foliage. You keep them separate. But beyond that, as I was talking earlier about in the structural style, kind of the Japanese way of doing it, everything's flowing consistently outward from the trunk. With the lignon style, you make the cut and the direction of the branch doesn't matter. It can go up, down, back toward the trunk, out away from the trunk, so that instead of creating pads, you create clouds. And I'm going to see if I can get my phone on this page on my book, so that at least for an immediate kind of is this upside down?
Yep.
Yes. There you go. That's good.
Oh, I see.
Oh.
Okay.
Interesting.
See that?
Yeah.
But it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's really, it's a beautiful image. And so you can see that in the drawing that I've made the branches go in every direction. And then from the trunk end of the branch looking outward, you see that they go in every direction. Does that make sense? What you're seeing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I would be happy to send along some photos that I've taken of Penjing that are in the lignon style. I like it very much.
That'd be great.
That'd be wonderful. We can share that to the whole club.
Yeah, my other elms, I've got, I'm doing lignon style with 2 of my trees, which I could walk out and put them on the phone, but the only thing is I haven't trimmed them. So I don't know what you'd see except a bunch of foliage. But yes, I'd be happy to get those photos to you.
That'd be great. I think this is a good break time. I'll give you a few minutes break. I'm going to shift to Renee.
I'll step away. But when I come back, if any other kind of questions or comments, I'd be delighted.
That's
Okay.
fabulous.
Thanks.
This has been great, Dave. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, where's Renee?
I'm here and I'm going to reclaim host.
Okay, thank you.
I'm reclaiming host.
And then you can spotlight yourself.
Oh, okay.
So you go next to your name.
Yep, I got it. Oops. Why isn't it doing it for me? Huh.
Maybe I can do it if I just can't find you on the list.
That's strange.
Oh,
It's not letting me do it to myself.
are you the host?
I am host. And I'm doing the little drop down thing, but it's not letting me spotlight. So let me see.
Oh.
So we're back, and I wanted to show you some other trees that have gone along further than the ones that I showed you in the first part of the program. And but the point is, in every one of these cases, the tree's not done. There's still work that can be done, and so I guess let's do photo number 1.
Okay. Oh,
No, okay, yeah.
That's photo number 4.
I know. I had it queued up. I'm learning. There we go.
All right. So this is back when I was managing the bonsai collection. We had the PSBA, or the Puget Sound Bonsai Association, held an auction every first Saturday in June. And there's a fellow down in Oregon who's a very successful collector of wild material. His name's Randy Knight. And if those of you who are familiar with Ryan Neal know that he gets most of his material from Randy. And so anyway, Randy brought some trees to the auction, and this was one of them. And he put a minimum bid on it of $700, and it didn't sell. And so the auction was over, and I kept going back to this thing and looking at it, because the trunk makes a 360-degree turn. It's a full circle turn in the trunk. And I kept being intrigued by it. And Randy came up to me and he said, "You interested in this?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, $300. So I said, okay. So he just didn't want to take it home. So I did. And I looked at this thing and I could not decide what to do with it. And I bought it 11 years ago. And for 8 of those 11 years, it sat untouched like this on my bench because I couldn't decide what to do with it. And finally, 3 years ago, I started working on it. And can we go to number 2? I changed the angle because I like things that are a little more upright. And this was a little much because actually the branch on the left was kind of sticking up too much, but it was going in the right direction. I cut off some big branches, and we can go to number 3. I started shaping. I started getting some wire on the top of it. And then eventually I got it into a different pot. And so then number 4 is how it looks today. Now, if you go back to number 3, if you can do that, I don't know how easy or hard that is. The big problem with this tree is that the top part of it is really interesting. It's got a lot of movement. The bottom part of it is really dull. It's straight. It's kind of what I call a stovepipe. It's long and straight and very little taper. So I felt I had to do something about that. So what I did is, in picture 4, I decided that it needed some shari. So I carved away a strip of bark from a big knothole on the bottom of the trunk to another knothole kind of on the upper rear of the trunk. And I made it a very modest spiral, just kind of wrapping it around. So trying to generate textural interest and trying to generate movement. Well, I'm going to walk over, because the tree is in here right now. I'm going to walk over and try to do a close-up of this thing. Here's the tree. And I'm going to go up close. I'm going to turn the camera. Is this right side up or upside down? Can you hear me?
It's sideways right now.
Well, it's sideways.
That's right side up now.
Okay. Now, look carefully if you can, and you're going to see that the actual grain of the wood is a much tighter spiral than I carved. And so what this means is, in the future, I'm going to widen the left side of the cut on the bottom and widen the right side of the cut on the top. And the objective will be to gradually get the cut to actually match the grain of the wood. So the reason I was able to discover that issue was that I didn't use mechanical tools or power tools to carve. I carved by peeling the wood away bit by bit, and that revealed the actual grain. Now, you've seen the number 4, and you're looking at this tree right now. And what you'll notice is that I really like the motion of the 2 lower branches. And this has to do with the quality that I called in my list harmony, because what it does is we find things harmonious when we can discover patterns. And repetition in a design creates patterns that we recognize. And so the curve in the upper part of the trunk, at kind of the base up there, that curve up there is the same as the curve, the first curve in the 2 lower branches, so that we have an element that repeats itself and in effect ties it together. What we can't see from here is the 360-degree curve, and that is in here. And my problem is, how can I show that 360-degree curve and not give up the beautiful flow of the tree from right to left? I've got to work on that, but I think it's going to involve tipping the tree forward somewhat and changing the front from here to over here a little bit. And I think I can, without changing too much, I think that I can, I think I can have it all. I think I can have the beautiful flow, and I think I can get the 360-degree curve revealed. Okay, what's next? All right, this is a redwood. I bought this at a convention in Portland several years ago. And this is actually rooted on both sides. It's a natural redwood arch. And I don't know if you can see well enough, but this is where I should have had the arrow. But the front of that arch died. And so I've got a live strip just in back. But when the front died, it was very, very smooth. And it didn't look like the deadwood that's off on the left that has been weathered for many, many years. And so I had these 2 very different textures. And I needed to do something about that. And the other thing that bothered me is the pot looked very heavy, and at the same time it looked very short. So there was no suggestion of landscape in it. And so what I did is I changed it into a shallower pot and a wider pot, and that gave it more of a landscape feel. But at the same time, by doing that, it looked very, very stark. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with this? Because it's too stark to be appealing. And so finally, I made the decision to create a landscape under it. And I thought what I could do is give it context or give it an environment to go with it, so that that would sort of, there would be more there to appreciate. Just like in China, very often they put figurines in their bonsai, or they create landscape features with their bonsai to give them context. So the next picture is what I did. And you'll see that I created a stream, and I carved the newer deadwood on the lower part of the front so that it would have a similar texture as the old deadwood. And so I thought, and of course I created a stream and some other plantings, so to create an entire landscape scene. So I did bring that one into the garage, and so I'm going to give you a little bit of close up with the phone camera, so you can see a little bit more what I'm talking about. Okay, so first of all, here's the deadwood. This is the original deadwood. Then over here is the deadwood on the lower part that was completely smooth.
Wow.
And so this has been carved. And what I do when I carve is I notice that many times carved deadwood doesn't look very natural. And the reason it doesn't look very natural is that it's a sort of a negative of what natural deadwood is. So natural deadwood is very often a cylinder with cracks. But when you carve the deadwood, very often you get grooves with ridges. You all understand what I'm saying there? It's like the opposite. I put a piece of driftwood in at the end just to add a little bit of interest. And one thing that's important about what I've done here with the stream, and it's hard to see even with the camera because the light is starting to fade, and that is very often when I see people who have done Psyche, landscapes, or bonsai, where they put a stream in, they make it so shallow, it's basically just at the surface. So you look at it and you don't know what is it. You don't know if it's a stream or a pathway. And so it's very important. When I cut that stream in there, I went right down to the pot. I cut the soil out right down to the bottom of the pot and then put a little bit of sand in so that there would be deep banks. And you cannot see that as a path. You have to see it as a stream. And of course, the other thing is that you should not see anything that runs from the front of the composition to the back of the composition. And so always, and if you look at that photo again, you'll see that it disappears around a curve. Its origin is mysterious. And that's an important element as well. So anyway, those are the two things. Now, is there anything else that I want to do with this? And the answer is yes, because the sprouts or the branches that have grown up from this and then been shaped are on the verge of being a little too tall. So and because that should be a grand, if there's a stream running through this and there are shrubberies around the base and so on, this is sort of a grand scene. And if that is in fact a large tree or landform or whatever it is that bridges this, then those trees that are growing from it are getting a little big. When they get that big, they start to make the rest of it look too small. So I don't want to minimize the trees, which are really the live trees, which are really the focus of it in part. But I do want to make sure that I haven't made the arch too little. by allowing the trees to be too big. The other thing is I call this a Psi-K, and one definition I have of a Psi-K that is my personal definition, or not a definition, but an explanation. And I would say you can have bonsai that have some landscape elements like various kinds of plant growth on the soil. And you can have rocks that are incorporated into a bonsai planting. The thing that makes a Psi-K rather than a bonsai is that the bonsai, the tree, and the landscape are co-dominant, so that you could take the tree out and you would still see a landscape. If it's a bonsai, even if it's got some planting elements or a stone in it or something, there's not enough there. If you took the tree out, it's still, you don't really see a landscape. But when it's a Psi-K, you've made enough, given enough importance to the landscape that you could remove the trees and still you would recognize it as a landscape. So they're co-dominant. And that's my explanation of what a Psi-K is. Okay, moving on to the next tree. Okay, it's a bald cypress. Oh gosh, sometime in the 80s, I guess, early 80s, I dug this up out of a beaver pond in southern Mississippi. And the beavers had chewed it off at two different places. And the first place they chewed it off was the longest branch, kind of horizontal branch on the left. And then the next place they chewed it off, not that one, the one above it, go on the left, up, the big one. There you go. That's the first chewed off spot. The second chewed off spot was where the kind of the rising branches are. Right, yeah, there. They chewed it off there. And then I let it grow, and then I chewed it off above that. But anyway, so what I started doing was what Guy Guidry and a bunch of Guy and I used to be in Vaughn Banting's study group way back when, but he and Gary Marshall and all these guys were collecting these big bald cypress stumps. By the way, that pot is 36 inches wide. And they would train them to look like redwoods. They look like giant sequoias. They trained them to have a perfectly pyramidal shape and that big base and the flared base and so on. Well, the only bald cypress that look like that are juveniles. No bald cypress beyond a very young tree has a Christmas tree shape. So it's something that's totally abstract, that idea of turning them into a Christmas tree and then having a great big massive trunk with a flared base and so on. That's totally abstract. They don't grow that way. So anyway, I did that too. So you can see the dead branches that are slanting downward as I trained this thing like a Christmas tree. And then it got so tall that it started minimizing the trunk. So I cut the top off and I left this sort of gin spire. And then one day I said, you know, this is stupid. Why am I doing this? It should be a flat top. So this is the first time I had cut off almost all of the branches that had been on the tree or stripped them and left stubs. And then instead I let some branches go that were growing upward. So this is, I don't know, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, I started doing this. Meanwhile, the hollow trunk of the tree, after 30 years, was starting to close. It had generated so much new wood that the hollow trunk was disappearing. So in the next picture, what I did is I carved away 30 years of new wood to really open it up and show the hollow trunk that was natural to it. And the top started growing out a little bit. Then I found another problem. And the problem was that the Jin spire is usually at the top of the tree. It's like it's like that's the apex. The Jin spire is, and then the foliage is below that. And I found that, okay, here I am, I'm starting to create a flat top, but the spire is competing with it. It's like, what am I going to do? Am I going to maybe lower the flat top and put it down underneath the spire? Or what am I going to do? And I finally decided that I was more interested in having a flat top than I was interested in having a Jin spire. So next picture, please. I took that down a lot, and I'm developing the flat top a lot more. And now I'm dissatisfied with it again. Can anybody guess why? Wait, did somebody just say because it's ugly? Is that what I heard?
No, it's not. Paul would love to have that
Top
tree.
heavy. Top heavy.
It's top heavy. Bravo. That's exactly right. So the top is starting to diminish the trunk again. And the flat top needs to be a little flatter. It's gotten a little round. And it needs to be narrower. It's too wide. There needs to be a flat top, but a little less of it, because that's a magnificent trunk. And it shouldn't take away from it or make it less than it is. And so I couldn't bring that in here because, as I said, the pot's 36 inches wide. And it's a little heavy.
So David,
Yeah.
is there a way you can describe how you're going to do that? How you're going to make the top smaller?
Oh, yeah, the top, it's really easy because you just cut those branches back and they just sprout. I mean, it's like a weed, you know, I'll just bring those branches in, and I'm going to bring the top branches by, you know, you can do it partly by wiring and partly by trimming. And with the flat top style, one of the things, you know, we always talk about when branches divide, that a narrow fork is desirable because it's graceful. It's graceful when things come out narrow and then they spread out. It's nice, and not angular like that. But angular movement is exactly the characteristic of bald cypress. And what you try to do is almost form a bunch of Z's in the branches, or this way and then that way, and horizontal, and then up going the opposite direction, and then you go the other direction again. And what we do to make it fast is to wire a bunch of radical curves into the top. And actually that's not how they grow, because they grow angular. But it gives the right impression. So when you see a bald cypress and they've wired it, kind of a lot of contortions in the branches, what they're trying to do is, in a short time period, mimic how the bald cypress would grow in nature. And one of the reasons that Chinese Penjing artists say that Penjing look more natural than Japanese bonsai is because Japanese bonsai are wired because they're temperate trees and they take too long to grow by clip and grow. But when you wire it, you produce curves. And everybody recognizes that when branches fork, they don't fork in curves, they fork in angles. And so the Penjing with the clip and grow that have all this angular movement in them, the Penjing artists look at that and they say, well, that's the way trees grow, you know. But of course, they've got a 12-month growing season, so they can do this with clip and grow. You can't do that to a black pine or, something else. Okay. Okay, I think there's one more.
There's not another bald cypress.
Not another bald cypress. I mean, I'm sorry. I think there's another tree.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple more trees. Okay, this one. All right, this is a Hinoki Cypress. And I got this. It was taller than this, but I got it at a sale at a nursery, and it was bald and burlap. And the part of the trunk that I could see was nice and straight. And it was so dense, I couldn't see into it. But I bought it and took it home. And when I got it home, I reduced the top and I started clipping some of the branches out. And when I did that, I discovered to my horror that the trunk had 2 right angle bends. And I had not seen that. And so I looked at this thing and I thought, oh my God, what is it now? Then I went back to my friends in the Penjing world, and there's a style called square turns. And what I did is they're usually normal trees, but instead of the branches dividing at narrow angles and acute angles, they divide at 90-degree angles. So they call it square turns. Kind of abstract, but kind of not. So anyway, I decided, well, I want to take that idea of square turns and take it to the nth degree. So I started wiring the branches and I started saying, okay, these branches are going to be either vertical or horizontal. So the first 2 curves on the tree were what it had when I bought it. Okay, then it grew some more and it did some more. And we should have the next photo. There we go. And so when we talk about trees having harmony, this is the idea where everything is really outlandish, but everything also matches so that it takes, it starts to have a certain sense to it. It starts to have a certain even rightness to it, But I was unhappy with this because I felt the balance wasn't right. It kept continuing off to the left. And I thought that was putting a little too much tension in it. So I reversed the direction of the top of the tree to get the top closer to being over the base of the tree, not directly, but closer. So then there we got the next one. And so you can see how I brought it back. And so that improved. So when we talk about proportion, you can see the proportion of the various elements, how there's a progressive diminution of elements. And where does that come from? Well, I could show you, let's see, how will I, just a minute. One of the basic, one of the foundations of proportion is something called the Fibonacci sequence. And the Fibonacci sequence can be described as a group of squares, each one. Well, let's do it by numbers. First, the Fibonacci sequence is a series of numbers, each of which is the sum of the previous 2. So it goes 1, and then 1, which is the sum of 0 and 1, and then 2, the sum of 1 and 1, and then 3, the sum of 1 and 3, 5, the sum of 2 and 3, and so forth. Excuse me. So that illustration with the colored squares is a description of the Fibonacci sequence, and so is the angular spiral off to the side. And so when you look at a tree and you see diminishing elements or units of length, this is a very, very pleasing proportion when the first element, first unit is longest, and then by something proportionately shorter, proportionately shorter than that. And so that idea of proportion is maintained in this tree to a very great degree if we go back to looking at the tree, where the big long angle is followed by a shorter one, and then slightly shorter. And then if it's utterly predictable, it gets boring. So you have to change it up a little bit and throw in one or two longer elements. But that's one thing in terms of proportion that's being paid attention to. What's paid attention to is balance, the idea of having asymmetrical, but still stable looking balance by bringing the top back. And then finally, we're looking at that concept of harmony by having a repetition create a pattern that we can perceive and that seems to unify the whole thing. So when we look at this, it's very abstract. Some people might like it, some people might not like it. It doesn't matter, but what it does is it's a really good example abstractly of all those concepts. And so that's kind of what I was looking for. Okay. Oh, and the pot is really, I was so lucky to find that pot because it has all kind of right angles in the pot, even in the raised decoration in it and so on. Okay, moving on. Yeah, not a very good picture, but it's off of a print. That was a 5-gallon nursery black pine in New Orleans. That was a while ago because that's me. So I'm cutting off the top of that tree, and the next picture shows the tree after I cut. That was in 1988. Okay, next one. That's after I've been growing it for a while. I started getting an upper terminal and then started putting some movement in the lower terminal. Okay, next one. Then it got a little older. It was kind of horizontal, and there was something was starting to bother me about it. And what bothered me about it is I was determined that the trunk in its first movement should not go away from the viewer. And I was bound and determined that it was going to go sideways, go to the left, not back. What that did, though, is it created some slightly uncomfortable movements, you know, that I had intended kind of naively to be good movements. And it turns out, they weren't, it didn't look as graceful as I thought it should look. So then it developed some more. And I was changing the angles a little bit. And I looked at it and I thought, it's okay, but I'm not happy. And then what I did is I changed the front. And so many bonsai can be improved by simply changing the front. And so I thought, you know, I'd like to see this tree, maybe in the pot, I'd like to see the corner of the pot because it's a little more dynamic. So I turned it and looked at it from that side, and then that's the next picture. And I was pretty happy with that one. And what I did is I broke the rule by having the first movement of the trunk be away from the viewer. And so the pot looks too wide and too heavy because we're looking at it from the corner. So in 3 years or so for the next repotting, I'll put the flat front of the pot out again, but keep that front of the tree. And I think at that point, after 35 years by that point, or whatever it is, I think I'll probably be pretty satisfied with it. So I think that's everything tonight. So you all can have another beer or whatever, whatever you're doing on a Tuesday night. And I really thank you very much for your attention. It's kind of fun. You know, the thing I like to do most is work on bonsai, but the thing I like to do next is talk about bonsai. So you gave me a chance to talk about bonsai. So thanks for that. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, Dave.
Ask
You
questions
Yeah.
if you
Are there
want.
any questions, anybody? Unmute yourself if you have a question.
No, I talk too much.
That was lovely,
No.
lovely.
You
Thank you.
clarified it very well. That's why there are
Well, thank
questions.
you all. It was very nice, and I appreciate the opportunity. And this is the very first time I've tried to do something like this by Zoom, and so I thank you for working with me. And maybe if I do another one of these, I'll have a little better handle on it and know how to work my phone, and who knows. Anyway.
I
It was a
think
good job.
it
Thanks.
turned out great. It was really good.
Turned out wonderfully.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
This
Thank
has
you,
been a
Dave.
great
Thank
evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dodie. Bye.
Thank you. You did a great job, Dodie.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.